"Don't open that box, sir. Please don't touch it. There's something terrible inside." The scream tore through the thick, perfume-heavy air of the Hale Estate's grand ballroom. At the center of the room, Zuri, a 9-year-old black girl in a faded hand-me-down dress, threw her small body over an emerald green silk box. Her entire frail frame was shaking. Her wide, terrified eyes were locked on billionaire Marcus Hale. Around them, 90 of the most powerful people in the country stared at her like she was a diseased animal that had just crawled out of the sewers and onto their pristine marble floor. The soft symphony music abruptly stopped. The silence in the room was so suffocating you could hear the grinding of teeth from Victoria, Marcus's right-hand woman and the most ruthless executive in the room. Standing there in her diamond-encrusted evening gown, Victoria sneered. Her eyes darted toward Zuri, sharp as a poison blade, and her voice dripped with absolute disgust. "You filthy little street rat. Get your dirty hands off my present. Hold on. Let's freeze the frame right here. Before you pass judgment on this desperate child, and before you side with these arrogant elites looking down their noses at her, we have to rewind. To understand why a little girl from the wrong side of the tracks would risk her life, and her mother's only source of income, to stop the most powerful man in America, we need to go back 6 hours, deep into the hidden shadows of this very mansion. While the ballroom upstairs was being chilled to a perfect 68 degrees for the wealthy guests, the basement kitchen was a sweltering, windowless hell. Down here, there was no vintage champagne or polite laughter. There was only the deafening clatter of silverware and the heavy scent of roasting meat. Elena, Zuri's mother, was the head of the kitchen staff. For 5 grueling years, this hard-working black woman had slaved away in this underground oven, working 14-hour shifts and swallowing every insult thrown her way by the estate's management. Elena didn't endure this out of loyalty. She endured it because Zuri had severe asthma, and the corporate health insurance provided by the Hale estate was the only thing keeping her daughter breathing. The class divide here wasn't just obvious. It was violently cruel. A single glass of the red wine they were pouring upstairs cost more than a year's worth of Zuri's inhalers. Down here, Elena and Zuri were just shadows, expected to work, bleed, and remain entirely invisible. "Listen to me very carefully, Zuri," Elena had whispered that afternoon, her hands blistered and raw as she knelt to look her daughter in the eye. "Tonight is Mr. Hale's 50th birthday. The most elite people in the world will be up there. I need you to stay perfectly still in the staff break room. Hug your bunny. Watch your cartoons. Be a ghost baby. Those rich folks upstairs, they don't want to see people like us anywhere near their perfect world." Zuri had nodded quietly. At 9 years old, she carried the heavy, heartbreaking maturity of a child raised in poverty. She knew exactly where she stood in this world. She knew that her absolute silence was the price of her mother's paycheck. But fate has a twisted way of testing the vulnerable. Around 7 in the evening, as the party upstairs reached its peak, Zuri crept out of the break room just to get a cup of water. Her small, silent footsteps accidentally led her past the grand gift room. It was a massive suite overflowing with luxury. Silk ribbons, imported velvet, and towering stacks of gifts she couldn't even fathom. Fascinated, Zuri slipped behind a massive potted palm near the door, peering through the leaves at the centerpiece, a breathtaking emerald green silk box. Suddenly, the heavy oak door creaked open. Victoria walked in. The warm, charming, utterly fake smile she always wore around the CEO was completely gone. In its place was a cold, dead expression. Her eyes darted around the room like a predator, ensuring she was alone. She had no idea that behind the palm leaves, a pair of dark, terrified eyes was watching her every move. From her glittering designer clutch, Victoria slowly pulled out a pair of silver forceps and a tiny glass vial filled with a clear liquid. A wicked, arrogant smirk curled on her lips. With practiced, terrifying precision, she slid open the false bottom of the emerald box, revealing a priceless antique ivory chess set. Then she dipped a long, sharp metal pin into the vial of poison. She carefully threaded the poison needle backward through the white velvet lining, positioning it so the sharp point faced upward, completely hidden in the fabric. It was a flawless, lethal trap. She knew Marcus Hale's habits perfectly. She knew that whenever he received an antique, he would instinctively run his thumb along the bottom lining to check for the maker's mark. Behind the plant, Zuri clutched her stuffed bunny to her chest, her tiny hands clamped desperately over her own mouth to trap a gasp. Her heart was hammering so violently against her ribs she thought the leaves were shaking. She watched in pure horror as Victoria pushed the false bottom back into place, adjusted the silk ribbon, and walked out of the room with the proud, elegant stride of an executioner who had just signed a death warrant. Now the timeline snaps back to the present. The suffocating reality of the ballroom crashes over us again. That exact green box now sat in the center of the marble table, right in front of Marcus Hale. Victoria had personally carried it out, using her sweetest, most manipulative voice to pressure him into opening it immediately as a symbol of their 30-year friendship. He had a silver letter opener in his hand. The blade was inches from the ribbon. And that was when Zuri broke her promise. Forgetting her mother's warning to stay invisible, forgetting the crushing weight of her own poverty, she sprinted into the light. "Get away from him!" Zuri screamed, her small finger pointing dead straight at the glittering billionaire executive. "I saw her." She opened the bottom of the box and hid something terrible inside. "There's a needle. A poison needle." The entire ballroom plunged into a freezing, breathless silence. At the back of the room, Elena stepped through the service doors carrying a tray of champagne. When she saw her 9-year-old daughter screaming at the second most powerful woman in the Hale Empire, the blood drained entirely from Elena's face. The silver tray trembled in her raw hands. In a matter of seconds, her job, her child's health insurance, and their very survival were about to be crushed under the polished shoes of the elite. Crash! The silver tray slipped from Elena's trembling hands, hitting the marble floor with a deafening clatter. Crystal champagne flutes shattered, sending glittering shards and expensive golden liquids scattering across the polished tiles. But not a single billionaire in the room looked down at the mess. Every eye remained locked on the small, trembling black girl standing defiantly at the head of the table. "Zuri!" Elena gasped, her voice cracking with pure terror. She scrambled forward, her apron stained with spilled wine, her knees practically buckling under the weight of the collective glare from the elite guests. "Oh my God! Mr. Hale, Miss Victoria. I'm so sorry." A low murmur began to ripple through the room like a creeping infection. It wasn't a murmur of concern. It was a murmur of profound offense. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" a hedge fund manager muttered to his wife, adjusting his silk tie with a sneer. "It's pathetic, really?" An older woman draped in pearls whispered loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "These people always use their children to beg for attention. Or worse, a payout. The mother probably put her up to it." Elena heard every word. Each syllable felt like a whip cracking across her back. She reached Zuri and grabbed her by the shoulders, pulling her frantically away from the table. "Stop it, Zuri. Right now." Elena hissed, tears of utter desperation stinging her eyes. "Apologize to Mr. Hale. Apologize to Ms. Victoria. Please, baby, don't do this to us. You know we need this job. You know we need your medicine." But Zuri dug her worn sneakers into the marble. Her small hands remained clenched at her sides. She looked up at her mother, her dark eyes brimming with tears but blazing with a stubborn, unbreakable dignity. I'm not lying, Mama. I saw her. She put a needle in the silk. If he touches it, he's going to get hurt. Victoria let out a short, breathy laugh. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She didn't yell. She didn't look frantic. She simply placed an elegant, manicured hand over her chest, playing the part of a deeply wounded saint. A poison needle? Victoria repeated, her voice dripping with sorrowful disbelief as she looked around at the affluent crowd. Marcus, I spent 6 months tracking down that antique chess set for your milestone birthday. And now, a 9-year-old girl hiding behind a plant, a child who shouldn't even be on this floor, is accusing me of trying to assassinate my oldest friend. She turned her sharp, predatory gaze down to Elena. The mask of sorrow slipped just enough to reveal the pure venom underneath. Elena, isn't it? I understand your life is difficult. I understand that seeing all this wealth might make you bitter. But coaching your daughter to stage a dramatic scene at Mr. Hale's private party to extort a sympathy check? That is a new low, even for your kind. No. No, ma'am, I swear to you I didn't. Elena stammered, her spirit breaking. She was begging now, literally begging a murderer to spare her livelihood. She didn't coach me. Zuri screamed, her voice cutting through her mother's apologies. It came from your purse. The little black one with the gold flower on it. It's sitting on your chair right now. Instantly, 90 heads swiveled toward the empty chair beside Marcus. Sitting there, exactly as the child had described, was a black velvet clutch with a gold floral clasp. For a fraction of a second, the muscles in Victoria's jaw twitched. But she recovered instantly, offering a patronizing smile. Yes, darling, that is my clutch. Just like every other woman in this ballroom has a bag. Are we now subjecting my personal belongings to a police search based on the wild imagination of a disgruntled kitchen worker's child? A few uncomfortable chuckles echoed from the crowd. The kind of laughter people use when they want to sweep the ugly truth under an expensive rug. Marcus Hale finally moved. He slowly set the silver letter opener down on the table. At 50, he had built an empire by trusting his instincts, but right now, his instincts were tangled in 30 years of history with Victoria and the unbearable awkwardness of the moment. He looked at Zuri. He didn't look at her with anger, but with the condescending pity of a man who thought he knew better. Zuri, Marcus said, his voice deep and authoritative, are you absolutely sure you didn't just see one of the gift wrappers fixing a loose ribbon? Sometimes they use pins to hold the bows in place. No, sir, Zuri said, her voice shaking but her chin held high. She had a little glass bottle. She dipped the needle in it. Please don't open it.
Nếu bạn đang đứng ở vị trí của Elena ngay lúc này, bị bủa vây bởi hàng chục kẻ giàu có đang lăng mạ con gái mình là kẻ nói dối, và bạn biết rõ nếu lên tiếng bảo vệ con, bạn sẽ mất đi gói bảo hiểm y tế duy nhất giữ lại mạng sống cho đứa trẻ. Bạn sẽ dũng cảm đứng lên bảo vệ sự thật, hay cúi đầu bắt con xin lỗi để sinh tồn. Hãy để lại bình luận cho mình biết sự lựa chọn thực tế của bạn nhé. Và tiện thể, các bạn đang nghe câu chuyện này từ đâu vậy?
Victoria stepped closer to Marcus, gently placing her hand on his forearm. Her touch was meant to be reassuring, but it looked like a snake coiling around its prey. Marcus, this is getting ridiculous. She's ruining your night. Open the box. Let's show this poor, confused child that there are no monsters hiding under the velvet, and then we can have security escort them back to the basement where they belong. Marcus glanced at Elena, who was silently weeping, pulling desperately at Zuri's arm. He wanted the tension to end. He wanted to prove the child wrong so he could return to the comfortable illusion of his perfect life. Just the lid, Marcus said softly, dismissing Zuri's warning entirely. We will just open the lid, verify it's fine, and put an end to this nonsense. No, Zuri cried out, trying to lunge forward again, but Elena held her back, burying the child's face in her apron. Don't! Ignoring the little girl's desperate pleas, Marcus slid his fingers under the emerald ribbon. He pulled. The silk bow unraveled. With both hands, he grasped the edges of the green lid and lifted it off. A collective sigh of relief washed over the ballroom. Nestled inside on a bed of pristine white tissue paper was exactly what Victoria had promised. A magnificent hand-carved antique ivory chest set on a deep walnut board. Victoria let out a theatrical sigh, pressing her fingertips to her lips. "Oh, thank God," she whispered loudly. "Marcus, I was terrified she had actually damaged it. I just wanted tonight to be beautiful for you." The wealthy guests began to clap. A few laughed openly at Elena and Zuri. "Take the kid away," someone shouted from the back. But Marcus wasn't laughing. As a collector, his hands moved purely on muscle memory. He reached down to lift the heavy walnut board, sliding his right thumb underneath the velvet lining to feel for the antique dealer's engraved signature. Suddenly Marcus gasped. He yanked his hand back as if he had touched a live wire. A sharp, burning sting flared in the pad of his right thumb. He looked down. There, right in the center of his thumb, was a tiny singular puncture wound. It was no bigger than a pinprick, but a single thick bead of dark red blood was already welling up against his skin. "Ouch!" Marcus murmured softly. The sound was almost embarrassed, a quiet disruption in the grand, sweeping theater of the ballroom. He pulled his hand back, staring at his right thumb. The single bead of blood sat there, stark and ruby red against his pale skin. It was such a small wound, a microscopic breach. To the billionaires and socialites leaning in to see what had happened, it was nothing more than a clumsy mistake. Victoria immediately let out a dramatic, breathy sigh, shaking her head with fond exasperation. "Oh, Marcus, honestly, it's nothing. There must be a stray pin somewhere under the lining. You know how these antique dealers are. They sometimes use them to hold the velvet backing in place. Just press a napkin to it, darling. You're ruining the suspense." A few guests chuckled, raising their champagne flutes. The tension in the room seemed to evaporate, replaced by the collective relief of the wealthy. They had successfully dismissed the screaming black child as a hysterical nuisance, and now the party could resume. But Zuri did not relax. She ripped her arm out of her mother's trembling grip, her voice tearing through the polite laughter like a siren. "Mama, get him a doctor. Right now. Call an ambulance. Zuri, please." Elena begged in a hushed, frantic whisper, grabbing her daughter from behind and trying to drag her toward the kitchen doors. "You're going to get us fired. You're going to get us thrown in jail." Before Elena could pull her away, the heavy oak chair next to Marcus scraped loudly against the marble floor. Eleanor Hale, Marcus's 64-year-old older sister, stood up. Eleanor was the true matriarch of the Hale family empire. She was a woman who had survived decades in corporate war rooms. She possessed an instinct built entirely on distrusting both sudden panic and flawless performances. Her sharp, calculating eyes moved from Zuri's stiff, terrified little posture to Victoria's over-rehearsed smile, and finally settled on the green silk box. "Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a frozen blade. "Let me see your hand." Marcus held it out, offering a weak, indulgent smile. "Eleanor, please. It's a pinprick." "Victoria is right, the dealer probably just..." He didn't finish the sentence. The first wave hit him a second later. It wasn't a slow ache. It was a violent, unnatural tightness that shot rapidly up his right forearm, locking his muscles into place. His indulgent smile vanished. His vision suddenly shimmered at the edges, blurring the glittering chandeliers above into harsh, blinding streaks of light. The room seemed to tilt violently. He shifted heavily in his chair, slamming his left hand flat onto the marble table to keep himself from collapsing. A terrifying rush of heat crawled up the back of his neck. Suddenly, the luxurious scents of the ballroom, the melting candle wax, the expensive French perfumes, the chilled champagne, morphed into a nauseating, suffocating wall of odor. His mouth went bone dry. He swallowed hard, gasping for air. "Marcus," Eleanor commanded, stepping closer. "Sit down." I'm fine," Marcus automatically gasped, though his face had just drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. He tried to push his chair back to stand up, but his legs refused to cooperate. A massive roaring wave of nausea hit his stomach. His right hand, the one that had touched the pin, was now burning as if it had been submerged in boiling acid. His fingers began to twitch involuntarily, growing numb and distant. "Marcus!" Victoria's riquez. It was a cry so loud and piercing that several guests flinched. She rushed toward him, her hands reaching out in a frantic display of panic. "Oh my God, Marcus, what is happening to you?" She reached for his shoulder, but Eleanor stepped between them with the speed and ferocity of a lioness. She shoved Victoria back so hard the younger woman nearly stumbled over her expensive heels. "Don't you dare touch him," Eleanor hissed, her voice dripping with pure ice. "Eleanor, he is my best friend. Move away from him," Victoria cried out, playing the victim perfectly for the stunned crowd. But from 3 seats down, a man was already moving. Dr. Aaron Pierce had been Marcus's personal physician for 15 years, and he hadn't earned that $1 million retainer by hesitating during a crisis. Everyone stepped back. "Give him air. Move," Aaron barked. The sheer authority in his voice snapped the ballroom out of its wealthy stupor. He dropped to his knees beside Marcus's chair, instantly pressing 2 fingers to the CEO's neck to check his pulse while his other hand shined a small penlight into Marcus's wildly dilating pupils. "Marcus, look at me. Look right here. What do you feel?" "My hand." Marcus wheezed through gritted teeth, his head lolling against the back of the chair. "Burning. Moving up the arm, chest is tight." Aaron's head snapped up, scanning the table. What exactly did he touch? "There was a pin," Eleanor said, pointing a trembling finger at the velvet lining of the antique chessboard. "Under the silk." He pricked his thumb. Aaron's eyes darted to the green box, then to the tiny speck of blood on Marcus's thumb. His medical brain processed the symptoms, the rapid onset, the localized burning, the neurological failure, in a matter of seconds. "Nobody touches that box," Aaron roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings like a gunshot. "Nobody touches that lid. Nobody touches that lining. The card, the pieces, the ribbon, everything stays exactly where it is. Someone call an ambulance right now." Victoria covered her face with both hands, sobbing loudly into her palms. "This is a nightmare. This was supposed to be the happiest night of his life. I bought him that set. I researched it for months. Oh God, what if the antique dealer left something toxic on it?" Eleanor slowly turned her head to look at Victoria. "Step away from the table, Victoria. Now." "Eleanor, I'm scared too," Victoria sobbed, looking around at the guests for sympathy. But as she lowered her hands just for a fraction of a second, her eyes met Zuri's. And in that microscopic moment, Victoria's tear-filled eyes were completely devoid of panic. They were cold, calculating, and furious that the poison wasn't working fast enough. Across the room, the absolute horror of the situation began to settle over the elite crowd. The murmurs started again, but this time the tone had entirely shifted. The arrogant hedge fund manager who had just accused Zuri of begging for attention now stood frozen, his face pale, staring at the little girl. The older woman in pearls clutched her necklace, her mouth hanging open. They all slowly realized the horrifying truth. The 9-year-old black child they had just mocked and tried to throw out of the room was the only person who had tried to save the billionaire's life. She wasn't lying. She had known all along. As 2 private security guards burst through the doors and helped Aaron lift Marcus onto a makeshift stretcher, Marcus turned his head weakly. His vision was fading, the edges of the room turning black. But through the chaos, through the sea of panicked billionaires and screaming socialites, he found Zuri. The little girl was still standing near the service doors, clutching her stuffed bunny, her mother weeping softly beside her. Marcus looked at her. He couldn't speak. He was too sick to form words. But the look in his eyes had completely transformed. The arrogant, indulgent pity of a powerful man was gone, replaced by the devastating realization that he had ripped the box away from the only person in the room who had told him the truth. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open. Paramedics charged in with a stretcher, their heavy boots thudding against the imported marble. The sea of billionaires, socialites, and tech moguls, people who usually commanded entire industries, now parted like frightened sheep, pressing themselves against the walls to get out of the way. The illusion of their untouchable, perfect world had been shattered by a single drop of poisoned blood, and the desperate warning of a 9-year-old girl they had just mocked. As Dr. Aaron Pierce and the security team hoisted Marcus's violently trembling body onto the stretcher, the CEO fought to keep his eyes open. The toxin was tearing through his nervous system, turning his veins into rivers of liquid fire. But as they wheeled him rapidly toward the side exit, his fading vision swept frantically through the crowd. He wasn't looking for his business partners. He wasn't looking for Victoria, who was currently draped over a chair, sobbing theatrically into a lace handkerchief. He was looking for Zuri. He found her standing near the service corridor. Elena was holding her tightly, both of them trembling in the shadows of the extravagant room. Marcus and Zuri locked eyes for one fleeting, agonizing second. Marcus couldn't speak. He couldn't apologize. But the devastating look of regret, etched onto the dying billionaire's face, said everything. It was the look of a man who had just realized that all his immense wealth, his private jets, and his Ivy League education had made him completely blind to the truth, while a little girl in a frayed dress had seen it with crystal clarity. Then the stretcher disappeared through the doors. The green silk box, with its velvet lining and lethal secret, remained untouched on the table, glittering innocently under the chandeliers. By the time the ambulance roared into the private underground bay of the city's premier hospital, the birthday celebration had transformed into a massive multi-million-dollar crime scene that no amount of PR money could quietly sweep under the rug. The emergency trauma team swarmed Marcus the second the doors flew open. Red and blue lights flashed violently against the concrete walls. Aaron Pierce ran alongside the stretcher, barking rapid-fire medical orders. Single puncture wound. Right thumb. Contact with an unknown fast-acting synthetic toxin via a concealed pin. Symptoms hit within 90 seconds, severe neurological distress, localized burning, cardiac suppression. He's stubborn, so strap him down, pump him with activated charcoal, and get a tox screen running 5 minutes ago. Marcus lay completely flat, his custom-tailored tuxedo shirt ripped open, his skin a terrifying shade of gray. He tried to lift his heavy head. I can hear you, Aaron." Before the doctor could respond, Eleanor Hale stepped directly into the path of the stretcher. At 64, she possessed an iron-willed authority that terrified even Wall Street sharks. Right now, she wasn't just a sister. She was a wartime general. You can hear Marcus, but you cannot speak, Eleanor commanded, her voice slicing through the chaos of the trauma bay. She leaned down, her eyes fierce. You cannot argue. You cannot try to stand. You will let them save your life, and when you wake up, we are going to burn down whoever did this to you. Those are the new rules. Understood? Under any other circumstance, Marcus might have smiled at his sister's ferocity. But another violent wave of nausea and heat ripped through his chest, and he squeezed his eyes shut as the doctors pushed him through the swinging doors into the intensive care unit. Behind the stretcher came the rest of the Hale family in a tense, frightened cluster. There was Daniel, Marcus's younger brother. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched rapidly in his cheek. There was Theo, Marcus's 24-year-old son, who had flown in from Boston that morning, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pure rage. And trailing behind them, kept at a physical distance by the invisible wall of social class, were Elena and Zuri. Elena held Zuri's small hand in a death grip as they entered the pristine, painfully bright hospital lobby. The little girl had her stuffed bunny tucked securely under one arm. She had practically begged her mother in the back of the security SUV, "Mama, we shouldn't be here. They're rich. They don't want us here. The family should be alone." Elena had agreed. She felt entirely out of place. Her apron was still stained with spilled champagne, her shoes scuffed, her hair damp with basement sweat. But when she had tried to slip away at the estate, Eleanor Hale had turned around, pointed a manicured finger at her and said, "Your daughter tried to save my brother's life tonight. That makes you family enough to get in the car. You are coming with us." Now, standing in the opulent waiting area, the separation between their worlds was suffocatingly clear. The hospital administration immediately directed the Hale family toward a secluded VIP lounge, equipped with plush leather sofas, mahogany tables, catered water, and a private nurse. The wealthy family filed in, surrounded by their security detail. Elena stopped dead at the doorway. She pulled Zuri back, standing awkwardly in the sterile hallway. A profound sense of unworthiness washed over her. She was just the cook. They were billionaires. They didn't belong in that room. "Ma'am," Elena whispered to the security guard at the door, her voice trembling. We'll just wait out here in the hall. We don't want to intrude." From inside the room, Eleanor heard her. The matriarch turned, her sharp eyes softening just a fraction. "Mrs. Foster, do not stand in the hallway like a stranger. Bring your daughter inside. Right now. You stay exactly where I can see you." Elena hesitated, swallowing hard, before slowly stepping into the lavish room. Zuri immediately climbed into a large leather armchair in the corner, her worn sneakers dangling high above the expensive carpet. She pulled her knees to her chest, hiding her face behind the bunny's floppy ears. For a long time, the room was agonizingly silent. The only sound was the ticking of a wall clock and the heavy, ragged breathing of terrified billionaires.
Suddenly, theo hai stood up.
The young heir walked slowly across the room and crouched down directly in front of Zuri's chair. He didn't look at her like she was a servant's child. He looked at her like she was the only person in the world holding the map to a minefield. "You're Zuri, right?" Theo asked, his voice shaking slightly despite his desperate attempt to sound like the strong man of the house. Zuri peeked over the stuffed bunny and nodded once.
Theo.
"Marcus is my dad." He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to hold back his tears. "You were the one who tried to stop him. You jumped right in front of him." "Yes, sir," Zuri whispered. Theo swallowed hard. He looked up at Elena, who immediately stiffened, ready to apologize again. But Theo just put up a hand gently. I'm not mad. I'm not pushing her. I need to understand. Zuri, please. What exactly did you see in the gift room? Zuri lowered the bunny. She looked at the young man's terrified eyes, and the brave, observant little girl took over. I saw Miss Victoria in the gift room, Zuri said clearly, her voice echoing in the dead silence of the VIP lounge. Every head in the room snapped toward her. Daniel stopped pacing. Eleanor froze. She thought she was alone, Zuri continued, her dark eyes entirely serious. She had a little glass tube in her hand. It looked like medicine, but she wasn't sick. She turned the big green box upside down. The bottom of the box slides out. Did you know that? She slid it open. Then she took a needle, dipped it in the glass tube, and stuck it underneath the white velvet cloth so it would point up. Then she pushed the bottom back in and tied the ribbon. The heavy silence that followed was absolute. The horrifying realization settled over the Hale family like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a disgruntled employee. This was a calculated, cold-blooded assassination attempt by the woman who had sat at their dinner table for 3 decades. Daniel Hale walked slowly to the reinforced window, staring out at the city lights. His voice was a low, dangerous growl. Did anyone call the police? No, Eleanor answered, her eyes cold and calculating. Marcus's chief of security, Howard Levine, is already locking down the estate. Dr. Pierce ordered the box to be preserved untouched. The lining, the pin, the ribbon, it's all being bagged for the lab. Howard is currently ripping the hard drives out of the gift room's security cameras. Daniel's jaw tightened. Good, because if that footage shows what this child just said, this isn't just a family tragedy anymore. This is a corporate execution. Elena heard the words and felt a cold sweat break out on her neck. Her hand reached out, tightly gripping Zuri's small shoulder. They were dragged into a war of titans, and in wars like this, the poor were usually the first casualties. Inside the sterile, brightly lit confines of the intensive care unit, a small army of trauma nurses worked with frantic precision. Marcus Hale was hooked to a labyrinth of transparent tubes and glowing monitors. A slow, dark drip of activated charcoal flowed into his veins through and for, a desperate attempt to bind and neutralize whatever synthetic horror was currently tearing through his bloodstream. Dear. Aaron Pierce stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, watching the erratic spikes on the heart monitor. He possessed the hyper-focused, icy calm of a man who was used to pulling billionaires back from the edge of the abyss. But tonight Aaron looked deeply shaken. After what felt like an eternity, the jagged green lines on the monitor began to smooth out. The terrifying burning heat in Marcus's right arm slowly subsided into a dull, agonizing ache. His breathing, previously ragged and shallow, finally deepened into a steady rhythm. The redness around the tiny puncture wound on his thumb had stopped spreading, the absolute best-case scenario. Marcus let out a long, shuddering breath and slowly forced his eyes open. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital ceiling blinded him for a moment. Aaron leaned over the metal bed rail, his face grim. "You're stable," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious whisper. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat feeling like sandpaper. That sounded like the polite version of a very bad medical sentence. "It is," Aaron replied bluntly, pulling a penlight from his pocket. "You are incredibly lucky, Marcus. Look at me." He shined the light quickly into Marcus's pupils. "If that pin had pricked a vein instead of the thick pad of your thumb, or if you had pressed down just a fraction of an inch harder, or held the board a second longer, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You'd be lying in the morgue, and I'd be filling out a death certificate for a massive, inexplicable cardiac event. The dose that entered your bloodstream was microscopic, and your body will eventually process it. You are going to feel like absolute hell for a week. But you will be here. Marcus turned his head slowly away from the doctor, staring blankly at the blank hospital wall. Don't open it. Please don't let him. Zuri's desperate, trembling voice echoed violently in his mind. He closed his eyes, and the memory played back in excruciating detail. He saw the little black girl, wearing a faded dress that didn't belong in his world, wrapping her tiny arms around the green silk box to protect a man who had never done a single thing for her. He remembered the arrogant, condescending way he had spoken to her. He remembered physically peeling her fingers off the box, using his adult strength to pull the poison back into his own hands, believing entirely in the polished, smiling face of his best friend Victoria. The crushing weight of his own arrogance hit him harder than the poison ever could.
Nếu bạn là Marcus ngay khoảnh khắc cận kề cái chết này, nhận ra toàn bộ khối tài sản hàng tỷ đô, quyền lực tối thượng và những mối quan hệ tinh hoa rốt cuộc đều là rác rưởi tẩm độc, và người duy nhất thật lòng muốn cứu bạn lại là một đứa trẻ nghèo khó mà bạn vừa hùa theo đám đông trà đạp. Cảm giác ân hận tột cùng đó sẽ xé nát tâm can bạn thế nào? Hãy để lại bình luận chia sẻ suy nghĩ của bạn nhé.
A few minutes later, the doctors transferred Marcus from the chaotic ICU to a highly secured, dimly lit VIP suite on the top floor. The massive windows offered a sweeping panoramic view of the glittering city skyline, the very empire he had nearly lost tonight. Eleanor entered the room first. The iron-willed matriarch didn't look like a CEO right now. She just looked like an exhausted older sister. She sat heavily in the armchair beside the bed, carefully avoiding Marcus's bandaged hand. "You scared me," Eleanor said, her voice unusually fragile for a fleeting second before the steel returned. "I am not interested in apologies. Why did you open it, Marcus? After that child screamed at you." "Why?" Marcus looked away, his jaw tightening with deep shame. Because I wanted to believe the little girl was wrong. I wanted to believe Victoria wouldn't do this. Wanting a child from the slums to be mistaken so you can protect your comfortable reality is not the same thing as proving her wrong, Eleanor said coldly. "I know," Marcus whispered, the regret thick in his throat. "I took the box back from her, Eleanor. I held it in my own hands, and I pulled it away from a 9-year-old girl who was crying trying to save my life. And I cut the ribbon while she watched." Eleanor's face softened just a fraction. "Yes, you did. And now you are going to do something different. Starting tonight." The heavy oak door swung open and Howard Levine, the chief of security, stepped into the room. Howard was a massive, intimidating man who looked like a retired linebacker forced into a custom Italian suit. He carried a sleek black leather portfolio. Following right behind him were Daniel and Theo, both looking murderous. "Show me," Marcus commanded before Howard even reached the foot of the bed. Howard placed the leather portfolio on the rolling medical tray and snapped it open. "Aaron got the lab results back from the pin," Howard said, his deep voice filling the quiet room. The substance was a highly synthesized, military-grade neurotoxin. Not commercial. Not pharmaceutical. The chemist said it was explicitly designed for small-dose effectiveness through a minor skin breach. "It's a ghost poison. It leaves the system quickly and mimics a sudden fatal heart attack." Daniel slammed his fist against the wall, making the framed artwork rattle. "So if Erin hadn't been sitting 3 seats down from you, she would have gotten away with it. It was the perfect corporate murder." "Designed for what?" Marcus asked, his voice chillingly calm as the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. "Why today?" Howard pulled a printed access log from the portfolio. "Victoria was at the estate last week, sir. She told the staff she was looking for an old photograph in your private study. There are no photographs in my study, Marcus said, his eyes narrowing into dark slits. They are all in the gallery. Exactly, Howard nodded grimly. I pulled the digital access logs for your private desk terminal. In the past 6 weeks, your electronic signature pad has been used outside of your active working hours 14 times. She copied your signature, Marcus. She rewrote the chain of command. Eleanor stood up abruptly, crossing the room to look at the documents. What does it say? Howard pointed to 3 specific lines highlighted in red ink. Amendment to the Hale Industries Voting Trust. Temporary chair authorization. Conditional asset transfer provision in the event of medical incapacitation or sudden death. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of Marcus's heart monitor. If you had died tonight, Howard explained, his voice devoid of emotion, Victoria would have legally stepped into immediate, uncontested control of the voting trust, the chair position, and all major asset accounts. She would be the absolute ruler of Hale Industries by tomorrow morning. Long enough to authorize a sale, Daniel realized, the blood draining from his face. To whom? Marcus didn't even have to think. His eyes burned with a dark, terrifying fury. The Apex Group. The rival buyer she's been aggressively pushing me to sell to for 2 years. The ones I refuse to do business with because they gut companies and fire thousands of workers. Howard nodded slowly. We pulled the private flight records an hour ago. 3 senior representatives from Apex Group flew into the city yesterday morning. They are currently booked in a penthouse suite just 4 blocks from this hospital. Theo's voice dropped to a disgusted whisper. They were waiting for the news. They were waiting for the obituary to drop so they could pop champagne with Victoria. Marcus leaned his head back against the crisp hospital pillows. The bandaged thumb throbbed with a quiet, insistent rhythm. A ticking clock counting down to a reckoning he was about to unleash. For 30 years, Victoria had stood beside him. She had stood next to his money, his power, and his access. The friendship was merely the vehicle. It was never the destination. Where is she right now? Marcus asked, his voice dropping an octave, sounding less like a patient and more like an apex predator who had just caught the scent of blood. She's currently sitting in the VIP waiting room downstairs, Howard said, a dark smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. She's putting on the performance of a lifetime. Crying hysterically, demanding to see you. Telling the nurses that you are her dearest friend in the world. Marcus's eyes flicked to Eleanor. The brother and sister shared a look of pure, unadulterated vengeance. Let her up, Marcus said softly. Marcus, you are in no condition to. Aaron started. I said let her up, Marcus repeated, his voice echoing with absolute authority. But before she enters this room, bring Elena and Zuri in here. I want that little girl sitting right beside my bed when the executioner walks in to check on her work. The heavy mahogany door to the VIP suite swung open. Victoria burst into the room, her emerald gown slightly wrinkled, tears streaming flawlessly down her perfectly contoured face. She had rehearsed this entrance all night. She was ready to play the devastated, loving best friend who had spent hours agonizing in the waiting room. Marcus! Victoria cried out, rushing toward the bed with her hands outstretched. Oh, thank God! They wouldn't tell me anything. I thought I had lost you. She stopped dead in her tracks. The temperature in the room felt like it had plummeted below freezing. Eleanor, Daniel, and Theo were staring at her with expressions of absolute murderous disgust. Howard Levine, the massive chief of security, stood casually by the door, completely blocking the exit. But what made Victoria's blood truly run cold was the sight next to the hospital bed. Standing there, holding her worn stuffed bunny, was Zuri. Her mother, Elena, stood right behind her, no longer trembling, no longer apologizing. Victoria's fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine ugly rage. She couldn't help her elitist instincts. Even now, she felt insulted that a kitchen worker's child was allowed in the VIP wing. What is she doing in here? Victoria snapped, pointing a manicured finger at Zuri. She turned to Marcus, her voice dropping into a soft, manipulative purr. Marcus, darling, you've just survived a horrific medical emergency. Your heart is weak. You need peace and quiet, not the presence of the disgruntled servant's child who ruined your birthday party with her hysterical lies. Marcus looked at the woman he had trusted for 30 years. He looked at the diamond earrings he had bought her, the expensive clothes paid for by the company they built together. And then he looked at Zuri, whose threadbare dress was completely out of place in this world of wealth. She didn't ruin my party, Victoria, Marcus said, his voice quiet, raspy, but echoing with lethal authority. She saved my life. Victoria let out a breathless, patronizing laugh. Marcus, please. The doctors said it was an allergic reaction to an old pin. Are you seriously going to let this street rat manipulate you? Her mother is probably just trying to squeeze a settlement out of you. People like them, they see a billionaire in a vulnerable state and they strike. You know this. Zuri didn't flinch. She just stared right back at the glittering executive, her dark eyes completely unbothered by the venom. I know a lot of things now, Marcus replied coldly. He nodded to Howard. Howard stepped forward, tossing a thick stack of high-resolution printed photographs onto the rolling table right in front of Victoria. We pulled the hard drives from the gift room's security cameras, Ms. Victoria. We also traced your electronic signature logs from Mr. Hale's private study. And just to be thorough, we intercepted the 3 executives from the Apex Group at their hotel 20 minutes ago. Victoria looked down at the photographs. There she was, frozen in high definition. Picture 1. Pulling the false bottom off the green silk box. Picture 2. Holding the glass vial of military-grade neurotoxin. Picture 3. Threading the poison needle into the white velvet. And in the background of the final photograph, partially hidden behind the potted palm, was the little black girl clutching her stuffed bunny, witnessing the entire assassination. For the first time in 30 years, Victoria was utterly, devastatingly speechless. The color completely drained from her perfectly powdered face. Her jaw went slack. The arrogant, untouchable billionaire executive suddenly looked like a trapped, panicked animal. She stumbled backward, her expensive high heels catching on the carpet, almost sending her crashing to the floor. Marcus! Victoria whispered, her voice trembling, this time with genuine terror. Marcus, please. You have to understand. I built that company with you. I deserved that chair. You were never going to sell. You were going to hold me back forever. You built nothing, Eleanor interrupted, her voice cracking like a whip. You rode my brother's coattails, and when you got greedy, you tried to murder him. You are nothing but a parasite dressed in silk. The door behind Howard opened. 2 uniformed police officers and a stern-faced detective stepped into the room. Victoria Sterling, the detective said, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Marcus Hale, corporate espionage, and forgery. Put your hands behind your back. No, don't touch me. Do you know who I am? Victoria shrieked, her elite composure completely shattering into pathetic, humiliating hysteria. She thrashed wildly as the officers grabbed her arms, forcing her wrists together. The cold steel cuffs clicked loudly, locking over her expensive diamond bracelets. Marcus, tell them to stop. I'm your partner. You can't do this to me. Marcus didn't even blink. He just stared at her with ice in his veins. Take the trash out of my room, he commanded. As the police dragged the screaming, sobbing executive down the hospital hallway, right past the gawking nurses and the cameras of the paparazzi who had gathered downstairs, the reign of Victoria was officially over. She was going to spend the rest of her life in a concrete cell, stripped of her wealth, her status, and her pride. A heavy, peaceful silence settled over the hospital room. Marcus let out a long breath, feeling a massive weight lift off his chest. He turned his head and looked at Zuri. The little girl was still standing there, holding her bunny. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked relieved that the bad lady was gone. Zuri, Marcus said softly, a genuine warm smile touching his lips for the first time all night. Do you know how to play chess? Zuri blinked, shaking her head. No, sir. Chess is for rich people. Marcus chuckled gently. Well, I happen to have a brand new, perfectly safe wooden board at home. And when I get out of this bed, I'm going to teach you. Because anyone who can outsmart Victoria deserves a seat at my table. He then looked up at Elena, who was wiping away tears of sheer relief. Elena, as of tomorrow, you are no longer the head of the kitchen. You are the chief estate manager of Hale Industries Private Properties. Your salary is quadrupled. And as for Zuri, the company is setting up a permanent trust fund in her name. Every medical bill, every asthma inhaler, and her entire college tuition through graduate school is fully paid for. You will never have to worry about surviving ever again. Elena covered her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably as she dropped to her knees, thanking him over and over. But Zuri just stepped forward, reaching out her tiny hand, and gently patted the billionaire's unbandaged arm. Thank you, Mr. Marcus, she smiled. I promise I'll learn how to play chess. Look at Victoria's face as those cold steel handcuffs clicked around her diamond-draped wrists. Do you feel that pure, unapologetic satisfaction? Remember, just hours before, an entire ballroom of the world's most elite individuals blindly followed her lead to crush a helpless black child. They laughed at her poverty. They mocked her truth. If Zuri had backed down to protect her mother's job, a murderer would be sitting on $1 billion throne today. So let me ask you, when faced with pure evil wrapped in expensive silk, surrounded by a crowd that demands your silence, would you risk your own survival to expose the truth? Or would you bow your head and let the monsters win? Tell us what you would do in the comments below. And if this story of ultimate karma satisfied your soul, hit that subscribe button right now. 6 months later, the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung open. This wasn't a private, exclusive ballroom where billionaires could hide their sins behind velvet curtains and expensive champagne. This was the blinding, unforgiving light of the public justice system, and the entire world was watching. Victoria Sterling sat at the defense table. She was no longer wearing her custom-tailored emerald gowns or her $1 million diamond earrings. She wore a standard, ill-fitting Orange County Jail jumpsuit. Her perfectly dyed hair had grown out, revealing harsh gray roots. The arrogant, untouchable glow of the elite had been completely scrubbed from her face, leaving behind a hollow, terrified woman who looked 10 years older than she was. Her team of $1,000-an-hour defense attorneys had spent months trying to bury the case. They had tried to claim the security footage was doctored. They had tried to argue that the poison needle was a manufacturing error. But all their expensive lies crumbled the moment the prosecution pressed play on the massive courtroom monitors. The jury watched in absolute silence. The high-definition footage from the Hale Estates gift room played out. They saw Victoria sliding the false bottom of the box. They saw her dipping the needle into the military-grade neurotoxin. and they saw the tiny, terrified face of Zuri hiding behind the potted palm. The collective gasp from the courtroom was deafening. Victoria squeezed her eyes shut, unable to look at the screens. She could feel the crushing weight of public hatred bearing down on her. The gallery was packed with reporters, former employees she had fired, and the very elites who used to drink her champagne but had now completely abandoned her. "Miss Sterling," the Honorable Judge Harrison said, his voice echoing with stern, absolute authority. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of such calculated, cold-blooded malice. You used your immense wealth and privilege not to build but to destroy. You manipulated a 30-year friendship to stage a corporate coup. And when a brave 9-year-old child tried to stop you, you used your power to publicly humiliate her and her hardworking mother." Victoria began to sob. Not the theatrical, beautiful tears she used at charity galas, but ugly, desperate, gasping sobs. "Please, Your Honor. I made a mistake. I was under immense corporate pressure. I am not a monster." "No, Miss Sterling," the judge interrupted coldly. "You are not a monster. You are simply a criminal. And your money cannot buy your way out of this room." The judge struck his gavel. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. "On the charges of attempted murder in the first degree, corporate espionage and forgery, I sentence you to life in federal prison, without the possibility of parole." Victoria let out a blood-curdling shriek as the bailiffs grabbed her arms. She kicked and screamed, begging for mercy, but the courtroom remained entirely unsympathetic. As she was dragged out through the side doors, her eyes frantically searched the front row of the gallery. She found Marcus Hale. He was sitting perfectly straight, wearing a sharp navy suit, his right thumb completely healed. Sitting directly to his left was Elena. She was no longer wearing a stained basement kitchen apron. She wore an elegant, tailored blazer, her posture radiating the quiet dignity of a woman who now managed all of Hale Industries' private estates. And sitting to Marcus's right, holding her stuffed bunny, was Zuri. The little black girl didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched the woman who had called her a filthy street rat be dragged away in chains. The reign of the toxic elite was over. The grand study was quiet, save for the gentle ticking of the Geneva clock and the soft crackle of the fireplace. The toxic energy that used to fill this room when Victoria was around had been completely cleansed. Marcus Hale sat in his leather armchair, staring intently at the wooden chessboard on the table between him. Across from him sat Zuri, her chin resting on her small hands, studying the pieces with the sharp, calculating focus of a prodigy. "You've left your knight exposed, Zuri," Marcus said, a warm, genuine smile on his face as he moved his bishop. "In business and in chess, you never leave your flank unprotected." Zuri didn't say a word. She simply reached out with her small hand, picked up her rook, and slid it entirely across the board, bypassing the trap he thought he had set. She placed the piece down with a soft, definitive click. "Checkmate, Mr. Marcus," she said innocently, picking up her bunny. Marcus stared at the board. His king was completely trapped. He let out a booming, joyful laugh that echoed through the mansion. The billionaire had just been beaten at his own game by a 9-year-old, and he had never been happier to lose. He looked at Zuri, the heir to a fully funded trust and an education that would take her wherever she wanted to go in the world. "You know, Zuri," Marcus said softly, his eyes filled with immense respect, "the world is full of people who think money makes them powerful. But true power is having the courage to speak the truth when the whole room is telling you to be quiet." Zuri smiled, her dark eyes shining with hope. "I know, sir. Mama taught me that." And upstairs, walking through the grand hallways she now confidently managed, Elena smiled too. The ghosts of the past were gone, and the future finally belonged to those who truly deserved it.